It's a great relief to see you again, true soul. Brenna smiled, leading Simon and the others through the tents and ramshackle tables the goblins had erected for drinking and gambling amongst themselves. The outer camp here is for recent converts and those seeking to learn about the Absolute, while the inside of the temple is for the true faithful. Priestess Gut preaches every morning in the courtyard.
And after they break out the booze, Andric said.
We made ourselves sick the first few days here, Brenna said, troublingly enthusiastic about the whole affair. But you have to show your mark of faith to get ale, so it really encourages them to take it.
Of course, Simon replied, tiptoeing around a few goblins who looked to still be sleeping off the previous day's sermon. It seems quite effective. Oh, they raided an inn filled with heretics yesterday, Andric said, waving them off. The flaming fists were no match for the Absolute's drow warriors, he grinned. The army of the Absolute took on the flaming fist? Simon asked, feigning a touch of surprise. Glorious. This bodes well for the future, he said.
Soon her armies will march across Faerun, Brenna said, breathless as she led them into the courtyard.
The once stately columns and walls crumbled over the years between war and neglect and the Great Rain. With the sheer cost to repair the structural damage alone, it was little wonder the people of Moonhaven had just elected to erect a small shrine in town to Selûne and call it a day. The army of the Absolute had little care for the broken flagstone and missing embellishments. The loose stones were rolled away into piles presumably meant to fill the sling of a trebuchet or roll down a hill, and the reclaimed space became a bustling hub for the camp. Amid piles of crates and barrels arrayed on the outer perimeter was a quartermaster-cum-merchant, both distributing goblin-made weapons and hawking the spoils of their latest raids for those looking for shinier things. A long roasting pit was dug along one side with dozens of cuts of meat slowly being turned, cut, and tossed into a cauldron of stew, though occasionally an entire leg of roasted meat was passed to one of the ogres standing guard at the far end of the courtyard. Opposite the food line were several vats holding what Simon simultaneously hoped was and wasn't ale, given the look of it. A tall plinth was erected from bones and monster tusks in the middle of the space, presumably where this priestess Gut delivered her daily sermons. Several goblins were fiddling about lazily on bone flutes and hand drums, seemingly waiting their turn on the plinth, which was currently occupied by... When your spirits are low, she'll lead you out of the rut. All praise the wisdom of your priestess Gut. Laugh if you dare, recoil if you must. A new age is dawning with goblins a trust. Is that? Simon asked, gesturing to the bard in peacock blue standing on the plinth, his clothes looking a little worse for wear and his hat quite rumpled indeed. Oh, him. That bard turned up about a day after us, Andric said. Said his name was Volva something, and he wanted to hear all about the Absolute. But when he said he wasn't here to convert, the three locked him up with the other prisoners. Now he sings their praises for his supper. Though he's not a very good singer. Strange for a bard, Andric remarked. Well, there are different types of bard, Simon said. And not everyone is good, Astarion added, sneering as Volo's strained rhymes continued. Volo's more of a writer than a musician, Simon explained. You know him? Brenna asked, brows raised. Oh yes, he's quite famous in the cities. Ah, guess we wouldn't know then, Andric shrugged. City folk are strange. Night Warden Minthara has spiders await. The foes of the Absolute they'll abate. Mountains, great mortals, all ginders to quake. The true souls are coming, their lounders awake. I'm not much of a poet, but I don't think that's a real word, Karlak murmured in Simon's ear, frowning. Poets often invent new turns of phrase, Simon offered lamely, pouting slightly as Volo continued. There are enough bad poets in the world already, Astarion sniffed. We don't need any more mucking up the language. Sing something, you stuffed pigeon! One of the goblins yelled. You never sing about Dror Ragslin! Sing one about him! Another shouted, waving a hunk of moldy bread in the air. It seemed quite a few of the goblins listening to Volo's performance were holding mushy tomatoes, limp heads of lettuce, and broken utensils in a vaguely threatening manner. Oh, of course, right. Ahem. Here, Volo, I cry far and wide for great glory. Draw Ragslin's best make is a blade in the quarry. His name is Draw Ragslin, his voice absolute. His troops will disarm you and grow you the truth. With fragulous crown and with scepter abraid, Draw Ragslin short work of the innkeeper made, Volo said in a sing-song rush. I barely saved that one, Simon muttered, shaking his head.
Was it worth saving? Shadowheart asked.
The inn burned to ash, the captives were many, goblin kind had reduced them to cowering filfenny, Volo stumbled, sensing the growing tide against him. So raiseth your goblets and drain them with pride. Draw Ragslin, the true soul, hath led you... Glide. Those 8 words! A heckler cried, and within moments a jeering crowd of goblins began hurling their spotted veg in Volo's direction, cackling as he ducked and dodged and struggled to find a rhyme, real or imagined, for Ragslin. A goblin woman stomped up to the plinth and seized Volo by the wrist, yanking him down the uneven steps and through the jostling crowd as the musicians took to the plinth instead. Help me! Volo's stage whispered in Simon's direction as he was led off into the depths of the temple. That pretty much happens every day, Andric sighed. Gets them riled up and excited to take the mark, though, he added, gesturing to the trail of laughing goblins who were following after Volo, still tossing rotten carrots and wooden spoons at his back as they entered the temple. Whatever works, I guess. How lovely, Simon said after a beat, forcing a smile and falling back on his conversational training from childhood. Well, it's been a pleasure to enjoy your company once again, acolytes, but we really ought to report.
Yes, of course. The true souls are very busy, but I'm sure they'll make time for you. Brenna smiled. Priestess Gut should be in the main hall, giving the mark to new converts. Night Warden Minthara and Draw Ragslin are usually busy managing the troops, but I hear he's going to use the powers granted to him by the Absolute to speak to a dead mind flayer, to find where a weapon they were keeping is hidden, she said, nearly vibrating with excitement. I hope they'll let us in to see when he does. I'm sure they will. Your faith is an example to all here, Simon said, his empty praise well practiced. Come, let us report to the priestess, he said, gesturing to the others and hurrying away. This may be more complicated than we thought, he thought quickly to the others' tadpoles. Who knows how many other prisoners they're keeping? Who cares? Astarion and Shadowheart's tadpoles replied, almost in unison. I do, Simon said aloud, glancing over his shoulder at them. At least a little bit. We should at least make an effort to reduce collateral damage, he thought, returning to their mental link. Reckon if they're taller than your waist, we probably shouldn't smash them, Karlak reasoned. Just as a quick rule of thumb, you know?
We're not smashing anything to start. We need information now more than ever. Subterfuge.
Shadowheart thought back. We've got more than we started with already, Simon offered as they slipped into the dark interior of the temple. They'll all be drunk by this afternoon, and we have the names of their leaders. The main hall was littered with debris that had been simply pushed aside, heavier bits left in place where they'd fallen and holes in the floor repaired with haphazard bridges and pallets. As the main sanctuary opened up, however, the grandiosity of the original temple managed to shine through. The elaborate mosaic floors of lapis eyes gazed upwards in spite of the gold having been wrenched out from between the tiles. The enormous, decapitated marble statues of Selûne still held up the vaulted ceiling. The scent of incense still filled the air of the sanctuary, disguising the scent of burning flesh. Yowls of pain filled the air as goblins queued up before a grizzled goblin woman, wearing the robes, tattoos, and decorations of a powerful booyog, a hot iron brand held in one hand. That's our first stop, Simon remarked softly, approaching the priestess. Oi! End of the line's back there, a goblin snapped, reaching out to smack Simon in the shin. No cutting!
You there,
the old goblin woman called, striding forward with complete confidence. The goblins parted somewhat chaotically as she approached, baring her pointed teeth in a grin.
Now here's somebody special,
she said, her one good eye flicking across the 4 tall folk in their midst.
The Absolute has touched you, hasn't she?
Indeed she has, Simon lied easily. Priestess Gut needs to touch you too, a nearby guard said. Hold out your arm and take the mark. I'll not be branded like cattle, Simon spat, wincing slightly at the thought of that hot iron. We are true souls. We bear our marks already.
Yeah, maybe you lot don't need it. After all, you're special, ain't you? Like me,
Gut said, her lips twisting into a wry little grin. Not a moment later, Simon felt the sleek claws of foreign thoughts reaching into his mind, swirling about like stirring a cauldron. It was too familiar. Another parasite. Darkness enveloped Simon's mind as his tadpole connected with hers, showing Gut looking up into the shadowy face of a human man, familiar again. Simon had felt this presence before, in the vision crushed into his mind by the Absolute. This was one of the Chosen, who had given Gut her charge of converting goblin kind. The vision faded, and Simon once again found himself wondering what others saw when their tadpoles first reached out to his. Simon pulled back, breaking the last threads of connection between their worms. He knew that the first time he'd met the mind of one of these true souls, they hadn't read his true intentions, but that was a dying man, not a perfectly healthy priestess at the head of a line of would-be converts.
You've got quite a few shadows swimming round in that head of yours,
Gut remarked. Yes, that is why I've come to you, Simon said, pivoting to a half-truth in case she was still scrutinizing him. I'm in need of a healer.
Come to my chapel after I've taken care of this lot,
she said, gesturing to the crowd of goblins staring in rapt attention.
Don't need 'em interfering in true soul business. I'll hear what ails you.
Even as they spoke, screaming continued from a side hall.
That'd be the prisoners, Gut said. They got a choice to make, they do, but they ain't making it.
Convert or die?
Convert or die slowly, she corrected. Absolute ain't got time for dallying, though.
Perhaps we can amuse ourselves while we wait,
Shadowheart suggested, smirking lightly. Easy now, we're guests here, Simon said, the casual suggestion of cruelty not seeming to bother him. He easily fell into step beside Shadowheart, climbing a worn flight of stairs.
Well, if we're supposed to be good guests, I'll say the goblins' decorations are an improvement,
she smirked, looking around at the desecrated images of Seluna in the hall. The chapels in the temple had all been repurposed, even the ones with heavy damage. One whose wall had collapsed into a deep chasm held several ardent goblins, armed with hot pokers and wicked curved blades and iron pliers, taking turns tormenting a human tied to a rack.
Tell us where the grove's at,
one cried, though the goblins didn't relent in their torture long enough for the man to give an answer.
Pitiful,
Shadowheart sighed, flicking her braid over her shoulder and turning away. Surprising, coming from a Sharan. Not a fan of torture? Astarion asked, smirking.
There's torture and there's whatever that was,
Shadowheart huffed. A connoisseur, I see, Astarion tittered. Only the finest for you. And speaking of, he said, sniffing the air greedily and turning his attention to the neighboring chapel. The interior was lit with countless candles, their flames reflected in the viscous blood on the floor. A single man knelt at the far end of the chapel before a small altar, the original Selunite icon replaced instead with a cat o' nine tails hung from the ceiling. His back was laced with old healed scars, and fresh wounds, and blood dripped from the bladed head of a mace held tightly in his hand. The scent clearly captivated Astarion. Now, Simon chuckled. If the scent of blood was strong enough for him to smell, he could only imagine what must be happening in Astarion's nose. I'm allowed to look at the menu without ordering, aren't I? Astarion replied, though his expression was one of sheer delight. Though I might not order much at all. You already take such good care of me, darling. Do I? You seem less than pleased with me today, Simon remarked, his tone slightly cool as he led the others into the dark chapel. Their footfalls were damp and echoed off the glistening stone walls, sharp over the screams from the next cell over, loud enough to catch the man's attention. He rose to his feet elegantly, the dripping blood down his back not troubling him in the slightest. His well-sculpted face had been similarly marked with scars and cuts as the rest of him, with no effort made to heal them prettily. His marred lips pulled into a calm smile, and his gray eyes glittered with intense interest. "Greetings, child. I've met few aside from goblins here," the man said. For someone with open wounds on his body, he seemed remarkably at ease. Simon was impressed, although he couldn't be surprised. The wounds, the whip on the altar, the effortless handling of what must be incredible pain. This man was a worshipper of Loviatar. Simon had known a few secret worshippers in the past who wore cilices to public events without even flinching. From the look of this man, however, he was more than a mere devotee. Simon could recognize a fellow cleric when he saw one. "Indeed, not behind bars, anyway," he remarked, looking in the direction of the prisoner currently being racked nearby. "Ah, so you're here to assist with the prisoners as well?" "That's your handiwork?" Simon answered with a question. "Please," the man said, insulted. "I live for pain and its intricacies. What they're doing here is crude, primitive. I was invited to instruct them, but alas, some are just not teachable." Pity," Simon simpered.
Not only is their technique lacking, but their interrogation leaves much to be desired, Shadowheart remarked. Should have called me first.
I sensed that I was in the company of kindred spirits." He smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. It was the sort of disguised smirk that was flashed quite a bit in certain circles, particularly amongst drow. "I am Pain-giver Abderak, of the Melvant Temple to the Maiden of Pain. And you, if I'm not mistaken, are Lord Fontdale, priest of the ever-secretive Fontdale Temple?" Abderak asked, an intrigued brow rising as his gaze flicked from Simon's signet ring to his face. "We're both a bit far afield, aren't we?" "Indeed. Forgive me, I cannot recall if we have ever met, Paingiver," Simon said, shifting a half-step forward. "Ah, yes. Your sect cuts memories more often than flesh, don't they? Happily, this is our first meeting." "Then what an unexpected pleasure it is to see someone from the old country here," Simon smiled. "Forgive me. This is Sister Shadowheart, Cleric of Shah, Magistrate Astarian Ancunin, and Lieutenant Karlak Cliffgate, formerly of Zaria's legions." "My lord has quite the array of traveling companions," Abderak observed. "What brings you to my humble makeshift shrine?" "We're here to meet with the leadership," Simon replied. It wasn't a lie exactly, but I admit we were drawn by the sound of your worship. Forgive our intrusion. Always happy to share the intimate joy of pain with those outside Loviatar's loving embrace. Forgive me, but that look in your eyes, something terrible has happened to you. I see those same eyes when I look in the mirror, dear one," Abderak said, his voice a sensuous purr. "I hope not precisely the same," Simon said. "You chose the path of pain. Ours was thrust upon us, I'm afraid. We've all suffered in these dark times. It's little wonder you bear the scars of pain and anguish. Please, allow me to alleviate this pain. My work can grant peace and serenity, the likes of which few experience. It will be worth it, I promise."
Pain for pain?
Shadowheart asked.
Seems intriguing.
"I'm ashamed to admit it's been some time since I've fully worshipped," Simon said. "I've made sacrifice and prayed, of course, but I haven't had a proper dedicated worship service since I departed for Baldur's Gate." "Oh, I have something exquisite in mind for you. Forgive me if I'm misinformed, but as I understand, the Temple of Fontdale practices advanced techniques, sometimes for a 10-day, if the rumors are to be believed, he purred, his gray eyes darkening with anticipation. From one priest to another, please allow me to offer you penance. Simon hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the others. We are in a bit of a hurry, unfortunately. I will have to settle for a more typical worship session. The pain of denial is an ache I so rarely feel, Abderak said with a longing sigh. Very well, dear one. Simply face the wall, and we can begin. Will you watch my things? Simon Hart asked Shadowheart, as if this situation were perfectly ordinary. You all may wait outside if you wish.
I'll hold them, but I'm not missing a second of this,
Shadowheart replied, smirking darkly. Oh yes, this I simply have to see. Astarion grinned, fangs bared. Yeah, go on, Mr. 10-Day. Karlak laughed, happily egging him on. Simon's brows lifted in pleasant surprise. He hadn't expected his companions to be so open. Well, perhaps Will or Gale wouldn't be so quick to encourage him to go under a Leviathan's scourge. He dropped his pack, his staff and shield from his shoulders, and began unbuttoning and untying his robes and shirt. Shadowheart's eyes widened slightly as she saw the extent of Simon's tattoos, which she had only briefly glimpsed at the collar before. Intricate and black as night, the arcane geometry laced down his arms and across his chest and back like a second set of armor. And there, at the base of his neck, and encircled with eldritch runes, a dark, sunken burn. All three recognized it immediately as being delivered by a hot iron brand. To Shadowheart's trained eye, she could piece together that it must be the holy symbol of Hadar, though Simon never showed her what his god's sign looked like. Astarion noted it was ever so slightly deeper on one side than the other. Simon had jerked when it was applied. Karlak, as modified as her body was, could tell that his scar was the same age as his tattoos. And Simon was not much older than either. He'd been marked barely out of adolescence. Much like her, she realized, with a pang in her chest and a chug from her engine. Forgive me if I say anything strange, Simon said, giving an apologetic smile to the group as he arrayed the tops of his robes around his waist. This is one of many techniques I use in my temple to achieve an ecstatic trance and receive prophecies. Ordinarily, I have scribes at the ready to take down anything that passes my lips once we begin. Please, don't feel the need to record me so fastidiously. But if I do happen to say anything relevant to our mission, please take note. Oh, hang on. Sorry, Paingiver, one more moment, he said, rifling through his pack. Whenever you're ready, child, Abderak said, his tone gentle and soothing in spite of his sinister bearing, as he stroked the polished shaft of his bloodied mace. It sent a pleasant shiver down Simon's spine, and though he trusted he had never met Abderak before, he felt familiar somehow. Ah, here we are, he smiled, pulling out a stick of incense and a small bottle of oil that Astarion recognized with an amorous smirk. Anointing indeed. O Dark Lord, I offer you up this pain I am about to receive. Enter unto this temple that you might receive my sacrifice, Simon recited, almost casually, lighting the incense with a mere touch of his fingers and dabbing a drop of the musky oil at various points on his person. The entire process had the same relaxed comfort and ease as his spellcasting, without a hint of worry about what was to come. He braced himself against a blood-spattered wall and took a few slow, deep breaths. Let the cries of your penance be a song of praise to both our gods, Abderak smiled, though his expression grew slightly more manic as he pulled the mace back for its first blow. That first blow drew a startled cry from Simon, his torso forced almost to the wall, the razor-sharp ribs of the mace cut deep into the tattooed flesh of his back, oozing blood. The incense at his side began to mingle in his nose with the scent of copper and sweat, sharpening the pain in his body, heightening it. Keep going, dear one. Let Leviathan hear you.
Don't wear him out entirely, priest. I might have use for him yet,
Shadowheart teased. The second strike he was ready for, as ready as Simon could be, with his chest still vibrating from the first blow Abderak laid on him. His arms did not buckle, though his ears began to ring. He allowed his mind to gently unmoor, drifting into the sea of chaos that was his god, singing the pain of his body into the cacophony. Pain had always been easy for him to sacrifice with. Pleasure was too tempting to hold on to.
Pain is proof we live. Revel in it,
Abderak said, as if reading Simon's mind.
My. Who knew our friend had so much blood in him?
Astarion mused.
Try not to lick your lips as you say that.
It was easy to let the voices drift away as his lips began to move, reciting whatever sacred words bubbled up through the great sea of possibility.
That psi is an element of S subset 2 C bar given by psi is determined to be equal to C del 3.
As the blows continued raining down, Simon's eyes rolled back in his skull, his jaw growing slack, and his knees and arms trembling with the weight of the mace laid on his back again and again. It was heavenly. Abderak truly was skilled in his art. One of the last few thoughts Simon could call his own in that moment was to wonder what a virtuoso he must be with a whip. Guys? Are we sure he's okay?
He's a professional. They both are. It's fine.
Astarion's voice drifted through the ether of coming madness, pulling Simon's head above the astral surface for a split second. The cacophony collapsed into a single waveform for 0.6 seconds before he felt his skull grasped, lengthwise and crosswise to better access his hyoid. Simon's back contorted, arching and cracking as his arms flew out to either side, palms pressed flat to the slick stone of the chapel's niche, as if to hold himself in place, to keep from being lifted away. His head fell limply back past his shoulders, mouth open wide and eyes alight with searing blue starlight, pulsing and beating impossibly quickly. His mouth was made to move, and Simon's words were clearly not his own. He did not fight the intrusion.
Where is my prophet? Where is my precious one? Taken from my temple, treachery, perfidy. I hunger, I crave. Why do you withhold until now? Do you still listen? Hark, receive and give. Sacrifice is begun but never consummated. Food taken, withheld from the Lord's table. Inverse square law, square cube law, threefold law. Repay me threefold and three again, in the manner of Roland, and you shall be forgiven. All in threes. Three, then two, then one. Three greater, of three most high. Black queen, red queen, white queen. Beware queens with dagger in hand, betrayers all. Jewel of the crown, atop the jewel of the crown. Cast it down from on high. Do this in my name and share in your Lord's bounty. Break your chains, claim the crown. That's insufficient. Limit not yet exceeded. End transmission. The pain is insufficient. I hunger. I am starving. Inanition. Entropy. Degeneracy. Give. Less I take. When Simon opened his eyes again, he was lying in a pool of coagulating blood, the candles around him burning dim in spite of the height of their flames. The shadows pressed against him, dark and cool and focused. He heard voices behind him. Supplicants. No. But he couldn't understand them for the blood rushing in his ears.
"Are you with me, Lord?"
He asked sluggishly, panting his words in the deep tongue, his whispers disguised among the wet sound of breath. 4.1.1.50228896 5 hours, 35 minutes, 17.3 seconds, 5 degrees, 23 minutes, 28 seconds. 41 degrees, 53 minutes, 54.96 seconds north, 12 degrees, 28 minutes, 36.48 seconds east. Coordinates confirmed. 99.99983% certainty. I will always find you. I will always find my precious one. Anomaly detected. Inside. What is inside you, precious one? A mind flayer tadpole, my lord. Why? I was infected. Why? Because that is what mind flayers do, my lord. I don't understand. Why? I was taken. I'm sorry. Please restate. No. Why? No. Why? No. Why? Not why? It was a moment before Simon realized he was screaming. "Hey, soldier! Snap out of it!" "No, child. Let him savor this," Abderak instructed. "His god spoke with his tongue. Glorious." Indeed, for the first time in months, Simon could taste the cold, acidic film on the inside of his mouth. His tongue felt momentarily as though it shared a space with something foreign, something dark, something deep and unseen, caressing and adjusting and manipulating his larynx and jaw and lips to form the words it needed to say. And then it was not. The flavor of his lord's fingers moving his mouth didn't disappear so much as it never was. Simon stood on trembling legs, adrenaline coursing through him, endorphins leaking out of the wounds on his back, his holy symbol stinging lightly from where his lord had grasped him. Everything which made the pain worth it, desirable, was there. His nerves sang with divine presence, aching with more than a mortal body was meant to contain. His ears felt stuffed with cotton. Karlak and Astarion and Shadowheart's voices were somewhere in the room, but he still couldn't make them out. He could barely understand Abderak's words of praise, though they washed over him like sweet, cool waters. "Oh, dear one. Brother, you bore the pain like a true believer. The Maiden of Pain and your lord both heard you this day." Abderak sighed, his sumptuous tone gravid with reverence and satisfaction, as he gently cupped Simon's face between his bloodied hands. "Of that I have absolutely no doubt. Loviatar is most pleased with your performance." "Praise the Lord. Praise the Dark Star." Simon slurred, his throat aching as it did after any prophecy. But as Abderak carefully began sealing his wounds, reconnecting the lines of his many tattoos, Simon's mind was focused elsewhere, etching his glorious gift into a dozen memories so it could not slip away. He had orders.